The world of indie games is vast and broad, and there are plenty of services that provide access for players to try out so many different and amazing indie games. One such service is Game Pass, which is something I've talked about quite a bit on this channel, but I genuinely like that Game Pass introduced me to so many different games, especially so many different indie games. Indie games are, if you're not aware, defined as games that are made by smaller studios and do not have an involvement with AAA companies. AAA games are typically made by studios like EA, Ubisoft, and Activision, and so on. Basically, AAA studios are studios that hold most of the gaming market share. Meanwhile, an indie game can be made by anything from a solo developer to a small AA studio. For the most part, indie games can afford to explore new mediums, new art styles, and new genres and change things up because they're not restricted in the same way many AAA studios and games can be. Plus, many indie games are passion projects for developers who are truly interested in the game they're making or consider it their life project. Game Pass is a service made by Xbox that allows you to subscribe for a monthly fee and get access to an entire catalog of games from all genres. Each month, new games are added and some games are removed every now and then. I've gone in depth before on Xbox Game Pass in my review video, which I will link in the description below, so you can go watch if you want to learn more about Game Pass. Alright, let's get into today's list of 10 of the best indie games you can play right now on Game Pass. Stardew Valley is a game that many have been playing for years and absolutely love. The title is both cozy and interactive with lots of farming and cool simulation gameplay. You can raise fish, raise livestock, and even grow a family within the game. Developed by Eric Barone, otherwise known as Concerned Ape, all by himself, it took Eric about 4.5 years to make Stardew Valley. The reason why he even started was because back when he graduated with a degree in computer science in 2011, he couldn't find a job in his field. Eventually, he decided to try his hand at making a video game to make himself seem more employable. Of course, it turns out that that one decision was the best thing and would change his life forever. And now Barone is a game developer, and Stardew Valley has been so highly praised and acclaimed that it's been considered one of the best video games of all time. Stardew Valley is a great game for people who enjoy simulators, especially more cozy or lighthearted simulators. There's a lot going on in the game, but it's interesting and fun to tackle, and it's very rewarding in terms of its gameplay loop. There's also quests and things a player can do to get materials and more, so it's not just about farming, but it's mainly about farming. I'd say that Stardew Valley is an awesome game and definitely one of the best indie games you can play because it has a lot of fun elements, an engaging plot, and it's a very chill game, and we could all use a chill game sometimes. This War of Mine is a powerful telling of what life is like in war from the perspective of the civilian trying to survive. Rather than create an action-packed soldier-based story, this War of Mine attempts to show the civilian cost of war, which is often overlooked in many war-based movies, books, and games. This War of Mine starts out with you playing as 3 individuals, Pavel, Katya, and Bruno, as they hide out from bombing and hostile groups. The entire scenario is pretty terrifying, and this game really pits you into a position where you must make choices that may not be moral but are almost necessary for survival. Developed by 11-Bit Studios, a Polish game developer that also worked on Frostpunk, which is a game you'll see later on this list as well, this War of Mine is inspired by real events like the Siege of Sarajevo and more, but does take place in a fictional country. Keeping your group alive is the most important objective alongside surviving, of course. However, there are plenty of things that can hinder your efforts aside from the overall war itself. Starvation, lack of warmth, lack of medicine, lack of water, and more are all obstacles that you must face throughout the game's duration. This War of Mine is not a fast-paced game that instantly rewards you for actions you take. It's a game that is meant to invoke a deep sense of feeling in regards to the civilian toll of war. I know that this game may not be for everyone because it's certainly not a fun game in the sense that it's actually quite depressing, but I think it's an important game all the same. Personally, I find that this War of Mine is an interesting game because it does tackle the idea of war in a way that other games don't try to. It is relatively realistic to the perils that many war survivors and refugees describe, and it's a harrowing thing to think about. So if you want a game that is more thought-provoking than just being a game, then you should definitely play this War of Mine. I feel like at this point I've talked about Hollow Knight so much on this channel, but of course there's a reason for that. You see, Hollow Knight is a game that I've said time and time again is an absolute experience. One of the most beloved Metroidvanias ever made, Hollow Knight is unique, has a lovely art style, fun gameplay, and a great story behind it. The idea for Hollow Knight actually began in a game jam called Ludum Dare 2013, which was an event where people would develop games in a super limited period of time. Ari Gibson and William Plen developed a game called Hungry Knight, which included a character killing bugs to stop starvation. The game was not considered great at the time, but eventually the two would use this as a foundation to create Hollow Knight. They would establish Team Cherry, and the game Hollow Knight would be made. Hollow Knight is about a bug called the Knight who must figure out what happened in a fallen kingdom named Hollow Nest. The story of this game is explored and discovered by interactions with NPCs, and the game is full of intense boss fights and interconnected weaving locations in the map. Personally, I think that Hollow Knight is an amazing title that everyone should give a try because it has a lot of gameplay features that many people will like, and it also has a great storyline that is equally fun to explore. If you want to know more about Hollow Knight, you can check out these two videos I've linked in the description below, my Souls-like analysis video and my top 10 best Souls-like games not made by From Software. I didn't ever think that I would enjoy a video game about power washing things, but here we are. Power Wash Simulator is exactly what it sounds like. It's a game where you power wash stuff, be it cars or backyards or really anything. Power Wash Simulator is one of those games that I definitely consider to be relatively cozy, but more of a game that you can unwind with. There's nothing crazy or thought-provoking about this game, and the gameplay is relatively simple. For the most part, you're just power washing things, and there's nothing else that you really do. You collect money and upgrade your power wash tools, but your entire focus is just cleaning things. It's also considered a pretty satisfying game if you enjoy cleaning or you enjoy seeing things get cleaned or whatever else, honestly. To me, I thought it was a bit silly to imagine playing at first, but after playing it, I actually had a lot of fun with this game and I understand the hype behind it. Like I said, it's a good unwinding game or a game that you play to just relax after a long or difficult day. I think it's a lot of fun, and if you enjoy these sorts of simulation games, then I think Power Wash Simulator is definitely interesting. Another game I feel like I've talked about a lot but can't stop talking about has to be Dead Cells. I consider Dead Cells to be one of the best games of all time, and I consider it to be one of the few games I can rate with a 10 out of 10 without even thinking about it. Dead Cells is about an alchemist who is executed but somehow keeps coming back to life. Although the alchemist's soul lives, his body can still die, so he has to continue to inhabit a new body each time. The alchemist determines that he must take down the king of the island he's imprisoned on and must face the peril of enemies and bosses along the way. Dead Cells is a pixel-style Metroidvania game that features some of my personal favorite platforming and combat. With the variety of melee weapons, ranged weapons, power-ups, outfits, and more, Dead Cells is a very complete, well-rounded game that never fails to be fun. Dead Cells was developed by Motion Twin, an independent studio located in France that operates based on a workers' cooperative. Spinning off of that group was called Evil Empire, and they wanted to continue working on Dead Cells post-release, while the rest of Motion Twin wanted to move on to other projects, which is why you'll see Evil Empire listed as another developer. One of the interesting things about Dead Cells gameplay is the fact that each time you die in the game, you have to go all the way back to the beginning and restart at the first map, which is the prison. As you go along the game, the story becomes clearer and the gameplay becomes more exciting as you find blueprints for even crazier weapons each time. The neat thing about Dead Cells is the fact that it's a very replayable game. I 100% recommend it any day. Goat Simulator has always been known as a game that has some interestingly insane gameplay. The first Goat Simulator was an insane experience, and Coffee Stain Studios decided to release a sequel with even better graphics and gameplay. That sequel, of course, being Goat Simulator 3. No, there's no Goat Simulator 2, there is just Goat Simulator 3, and if that doesn't tell you enough about this series, I'm not sure what will. Developed by Coffee Stain Studios, a Swedish game developer, Goat Simulator 3 is basically one of the most insane and bizarre games I've ever played, and I just couldn't stop laughing at it. It's basically just a massive chaos simulator where your objective is to wreak havoc and mayhem across the map. The ragdoll physics, in combination with the Goat Illuminati shtick and the fact that there are a ton of Easter eggs for other franchises like Skyrim.
Hey, you're finally awake!
Hey, you're finally awake.
Make this game absolutely hilarious and a pretty cool experience. For the most part, Goat Simulator 3 consists of you just running around and unlocking events that your main objective is to essentially do something, but that something just ends up wreaking havoc and mayhem. It's a very chaotic video game, and all the same, it's a very silly one too. You can deck out your goat in many different outfit pieces, perform tricks, smack into people or objects arbitrarily, hijack and drive cars, lick and drag things with you, destroy the lives of those around you, and even get arrested by the police. For the most part, Goat Simulator 3 is one of my favorite games from this list, not because it it has an in-depth story or anything, but just because it's fun to play. Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, or TABS, is another one of those not so serious silly games that I absolutely love. TABS is a game where you essentially just set up simulations of battles in different time periods and eras of war technology and then play out that particular scenario that you designed. TABS has a very funny look and art style to it with its low poly detailed models and its exaggerated ragdoll physics. It's a pretty interesting take on a game that's supposed to simulate battles depending on time period, as it could easily have been a more serious or slightly boring game. However, TABS takes the idea and designs a fun and silly style of gameplay that can keep you hooked. Landfall Games, the developer behind TABS, made the game during a week-long game jam set in a Swedish castle. Releasing back in 2016, the game was met with a lot of love from critics and players alike. Being able to just pitch crazy battle scenarios against each other, go through a campaign, design your own sandbox world, and do pretty much whatever you want with the different armies makes for a lighthearted but fun experience. Totally Accurate Battle Simulator is definitely a game I recommend if you just want to play to have fun and unwind a bit. Frostpunk is a unique and interesting strategy game where you play as the leader of a settlement of people who are trying to survive in the harsh environment of a winter region. Set in an alternate version of the year 1886 to 1887, a worldwide volcanic winter as a result of the eruption of several volcanoes has led to the need for people to band together to survive. You play as the captain and must help build up a society of survivors who are all cold, tired, hungry, and even sick. Your main goal is to keep social order alive, build, and help your people continue surviving. However, you will face plenty of moral dilemmas and issues along the way. For instance, you may need to enact child labor laws, 24-hour labor laws, and more, putting you in a position where you may need to value survival over ethics or vice versa. Frostpunk is a strategy game, so it's a bit different from some of the other games on this list. There's not really the same kind of action in this game like maybe Dead Cells, but strategy games are, in my opinion, still fun nonetheless, because you can be creative and try out many different scenarios. The outcome of the society that you build depends on your decisions throughout the game. If you fail, you may be killed by your own people, or if you keep up your good decisions, you may eventually be faced with a scenario where you can become an autocratic supreme ruler and begin a dictatorial reign over the people. Frostpunk does a good job in showing how far someone with too much power can go when given access to all this power. Frostpunk was developed by 11-Bit Studios, which is the same group that worked on This War of Mine. It seems pretty in line with This War of Mine and its similar attempt to showcase more morality and survival than just providing an action-packed game. Frostpunk is also getting a sequel sometime in 2024, and it's set to take place 30 years after the first game. Darkest Dungeon is a roguelike RPG that sees you, the player, controlling several heroes that must go through several dungeons and explore them, fighting off whatever monsters are within. Heroes gained in the game belong to one of 15 different classes, but heroes that die within a dungeon are lost forever, raising the stakes significantly on winning. The dungeons are procedurally generated, which means that you may not see the same thing each time you play the same dungeon, which does keep it interesting. Darkest Dungeon doesn't just deal with combat-based situations though, there's also the affliction system. This basically forces you to consider things like stress, which may hinder your hero's ability to fight against oncoming enemies. The director and lead designer Chris Barassa and Tyler Sigmund respectively had initially met while working at Backbone Entertainment. Eventually, the two would join together and form a new studio called Red Hook Studios, which is based in British Columbia. Their team would grow and they began to work on Darkest Dungeon, which was initially a tile-based game. Darkest Dungeon has many influences, including Lovecraftian horror, but instead of using insanity as a mechanic in the game, the team decided to use stress as a way to raise the stakes. Inspired by other games like Bard's Tale, they wanted to bring a more human element to the picture with their game Darkest Dungeon. Darkest Dungeon is definitely a unique and fun game, and I definitely recommend it if you like dungeon crawlers, roguelikes, and RPGs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has long been one of my favorite franchises and has always been something I enjoyed watching as a kid. Of course, seeing a game that includes some of my favorite characters is a no-brainer for me to play. That's why I decided to check out TMNT Shredder's Revenge. For my sanity's sake, I'm not going to say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles every time, so TMNT will have to do for now. The beat-em-up game was inspired by the TMNT animated series from 1987, including the original voice actors from that series, which is honestly amazing. The side-scrolling action brawler features an arcade mode and a story mode, fun action and gameplay, local and online co-op for up to 6 people, and a cool pixelated art style. TMNT Shredder's Revenge was developed by Tribute Games, which was made up of several former Ubisoft employees who had worked on similar brawler-type games while at Ubisoft. After forming Tribute Games, they worked on Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, and were eventually approached by Nickelodeon with the idea of doing a similar brawler title for TMNT. The Montreal-based studio was inspired by the 90s TMNT games, but wanted to add some modern flair to them while still paying homage to the origins. A commercial success, a lot of people really enjoyed this game, and I'm certainly one of them. I'm also a bit biased when it comes to the pixelated art style, as it's one of my favorites, so I think that TMNT Shredder's Revenge covers a lot of things that I want and provides a bit of a different gameplay style compared to other games on this list. And that makes the list. Don't forget to like and subscribe with notifications set to all so you never miss out on a single upload. If you've played any of these games, do let me know in the comments below which of them is your favorite and what other indie games you've played on Game Pass that you've enjoyed. Don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, entertainment, and more. The link to that, as well as all our other links, are in the description below. See you all in the next video.